and I'm on the phone with a couple of special guests. One is Al Johnson, not really a guest, but he's going to be regularly on here, and our mutual friend Sargis Sangari. Al, you take it away, bro.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, I definitely appreciate you having me
And
back on.
and
So,
and keep in mind, it'll take a few minutes for people to really get on here, so you can kind of take your time
I'll
on
put my tap shoes
introducing
on.
Sargis.
I'll put my tap shoes on. So,
Okay.
luckily, every
All
so
right.
anyway, we just wanted to. So you're familiar with Sargis, but I guess for the audience that isn't, just some quick background on how we met. Initially, I met Sargis when we were over in the Middle East. We actually went to Kuwait, and then we were helping him with our EOD unit with some of the shaping operations that they were doing over there. And after that, um, we had some our paths crossed again when we were looking, years ago, same time that you and I were looking at the CCP's information operations and some of
Okay. To be
their
clear,
shaping
when
up.
you say our first met in Middle East, I didn't meet Sargis at that
No,
time. You were talking our in regard to somebody else's our.
correct. Yeah. So when you and I were walking around, with the looking at the CCP shaping and information operations that were going on, about that same time, that's when crossed paths again with Sargis a few years later after the Middle East and Kuwait there, and then it was basically he had a similar mindset, so he understood after presenting him the facts, hey, that's what's going on, so he could see the pattern analysis much as most good military folks can see it, and what they were doing. And so he helped out with providing some information about some of the groups from Asia, or some individuals from some Asian nations that were going to the Middle East, becoming radicalized, and then returning back to their country of origin. And in that, this transnational movement that was going on between regions to create radicalization, to radicalize different parts in the globe, so to speak. He was able to analyze that, but in addition to it, he saw where the Chinese were moving in. So most people don't realize the Chinese were involved in Syria, for example, that they did have some operations going on down there. That the Chinese did have a reach farther than most people think of in the Middle East. And so he saw that, and so we worked with him a little bit on being able to provide some education to various groups. You and I think were there with him in Tokyo in 2015 during the conference. So when you were
Right. You're talking about
presenting your
Al.
conference.
This is Al Johnson speaking, by the way. And when he says you and I were with Sargis in Tokyo in 2015, he's talking about me in this regard. So it was Al and me at this point. But the times that he was talking about in the Middle East and Iraq, that was not me. That was Al and Sargis and others.
Yep. And so in 2015, that's when you, Michael Yon, Sargis, and me were in, went to, I think it was Tokyo, and then did a conference. So I was presenting about, radicalization. Sargis was presenting about, some of the groups that went to, and individuals that went from Japan to the Middle East, got radicalized, and were moving around, back in Asia. And then you were presenting on the information warfare for the CCP. And so that's how we knew each other from that. We had that conference in 2015, back then. And as back in 2015, hardly anybody was talking about the Chinese information operations, and how it actually had a nexus within the Middle East. Everybody was looking at the Middle East in isolation. They were looking at it, and there's a lot of elements in the Middle East that are isolated. Sometimes it comes down to tribal. Two families don't like each other, and that's the point of conflict. But there are points of intersection where the Chinese do operate within the Middle East, and that was what the team kind of brought into it. Is everybody had that unique perspective of identifying both the local, the regional, and then the transnational picture about what these groups were doing and how they interrelated and operated, and then what that meant for hometown USA, hometown Japan, hometown South Korea, hometown Thailand. And so that was kind of the background of where we're at. But I do want to, I don't want to waste too much time on this, but I do want to introduce Sargis in his own words. He has kind of an interesting story. So, being honest, Sargis was the first Assyrian Christian that I'd ever met, and so I've heard of him, but I never met one. So Sargis was the first, and he was probably one of the best ambassadors for the Assyrian Christian community, in America, and actually across the world. And the history that they've got in that region is fascinating. But I won't go too far into it. But I'd like to, in his own words, welcome him in, and have him describe his background and how he ended up, being born in Iran, but ended up in the U.S. Army. So, Colonel Sangari, or Sargis Sangari, glad you're here. And, if you would just kind of bring us from, how did you end up from, born in Iran, but how'd you end up, in the U.S. Army? And now you're actually the congressional candidate for the Republican Party, I believe, in 9th District in Illinois. So if you could just briefly bring us into that, your background, and, that helps explain some of your unique perspectives on these issues.
Thanks very much, Al. Much appreciated. Mike, you're looking good, buddy.
Thanks,
I'm glad
Sargis.
you're healthy and staying safe, man.
Thank you.
But no, look, for me, it's a matter of pride. I get a chance to, have an opportunity to meet guys like you, Mike, and Al. You guys make life.
Uh-oh.
They do make it dramatic to an extent too, especially with what we decide to do as far as our, focus on making sure that the U.S. At various different levels has had all the guidance it needs to make the right decisions, especially with the policy folks. But I was born in Iran. I was there for the Iranian Revolution. Ended up after the Iranian Revolution, the Christian Assyrians were not going to be able to really have a future. Probably if I had stayed in Iran, I probably would have been killed on the battlefields of the Iran-Iraq War. Just like most Assyrians on the Iraq side and the Iran side would have been probably shot in the back just for my Christian ethnicity. So we came to the United States, settled in Chicago. When I was in high school, I went to a briefing at the University of Chicago Oriental Institute, and there was a briefing about an Assyrian soldier trying to protect the nation in 612 BC. And that soldier's story really kind of set me on the right path. At 20 years in the service, U.S. Army Infantry, Special Operational Forces, multiple deployments, 6 years of continuous combat deployments, and a diplomatic mission in Kuwait. I ended up where I met Al. I ended up retiring and setting up the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And as you know, Mike, it's the operational and operational academic think tank, and we started giving advice right away for those Syrian Christians that were fighting against ISIS and ISIL in both Iraq and Syria from 2014 to 2017. So I ran that force structure there, which also allowed us to bring lessons learned to Ray and Thailand to try to let the world community know what the folks were using on the ground when it came to IEDs and how they were operating. The reason I ended up in January of 2015 going to Japan, because we saw how the SCO was still operational within the Middle East, how they were expanding their footprint. And at the same time, I knew that Japan, being one of our allies, needed some guidance and support. So we sat down, talked to their PSIA, and gave them some guidance.
What's PSIA?
Various different groups.
Sargis? PSIA? Sargis?
What we call Central Intelligence. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. What is PSIA so that people can understand?
Yeah, the PSIA is a public security intelligence agency for Japan. So we did have a relationship with them, and we did, warn them about what is happening in Japan itself. Because look, Mike, I don't know if you knew, but going back to 2006, when I was initially in Iraq, 2007, we're picking up not just Al Qaeda Iraq, but there were folks who were picking up who were identifying themselves as being Islamic State. At that time, we didn't know who these folks were. We turned them over to the Iraqi government. I'm not sure if you guys picked up anybody or you knew of anybody who was identifying themselves as Islamic State, but we kind of knew this was coming. And by 2010, fast forward, I talked to my wife. I said, look, I think this thing's going to blow up. If I stay in the military, it would be great for me to stay in for rank advancement, but I don't think my community is going to be ready to. After that diplomatic mission in Kuwait, I came back, and by 2014, I retired. And guess what? The Islamic State was fully operational by then. That's kind of a little background as far as how I come to know these wonderful guys, Mike and Al. Of course, they're much smarter and better looking than me, but I try to hang with them as much as I can.
Al, are you there?
Yep, still here.
Oh, take it out.
Okay, and one quick thing, another thing besides the PSA, if you could explain to folks, and this is very, very, very important, SCO, because you mentioned that you were looking at the SCO operations in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, we looked at the SEO operations of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and I think when we were on stage in January of or February of 2015 at the conference that we were at, we knew that really it's the SCO that is expanding, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that is expanding both China's ability to operate within the region, and also at the same time allowing countries like Iran that are and others to be able to profit, maybe not by trade where you would trade oil, let's say, for another commodity, but in this case, in the case of the relationship between Iran and China, basically profiting from China's ability to influence the global governments, the global stage. So Iran gives oil to China. China's not going to give them dollars because of, Iran's under sanction, but China will represent Iran's interests across the board. So when I came back in October of 2015, we published the NEC
Sargis.
crisis. That was 8 months after. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we were just breaking up on comms. You're clear. 5 by. Go ahead.
Yeah. We wrote that article October of 2015, which was the new model of power relations in the Middle East crisis. We looked the region and the U.S. And at that time, under the previous administration, remember at this time, President Obama was well on his way of trying to lead the Middle East, and he was pivoting to South America, and had absolutely no interest of trying to block China or the SCO with our allies within the Southeast Asia. So in our article, we highlighted that September of 2012, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave a speech at the Brookings Institute where he presented China's vision of the future and an address that he had titled at that time on New Power Relations. And according to him, as he had stated, that the interests of China and U.S. were clearly divergent. So this would enable the two nations to avoid the kind of frictions that would have sparked a possible war on a global
Sargis?
concept.
Go ahead. Again, we're having an
Can you hear me, Mike?
Got you. 5 by. Go ahead. Occasional breaks.
Yeah, that's okay. It happens. Live radio always happens. So he was looking at his recommendation was that for us to avoid conflict between U.S. and China, we have to agree to China's vision, basically. Name and communicated also with Iran, with all the other characters of like philosophy, like China, would be a concept that under the Chinese hegemony would be very difficult for people that lived underneath that, and would have to be in accordance to what Beijing wanted us to do. So fast forward to, again, the previous administration being told this, Rice, where she gave her own speech at the Georgetown University. She neither had an articulation of a new American policy or countered China's vision, and actually spoke about how we can maybe promote China's vision for the globe in order to empower it. And this is where we are today. We are suffering from the fact that we bought into China's global vision. Administrations and other administrations that came before it.
Al?
Oh, yeah, it's good
Al
point
Johnson.
there. So just to, could you hear me?
I got you, Al. Go ahead, and Al Johnson will be speaking.
Perfect. Yeah, just for the, I blame the Chinese jamming them over there. That's probably what's going on.
I can hear the jamming. Occasionally there's some random voice that kicks in.
Yep. But just to reiterate what he said some very important facts there, and then some of it blanked out. But just to reiterate it, the SCO is the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, and it was based off of what was called the Shanghai Five, and this is kind of a new axis. And so in the 1990s, China realized that it would have to gain some allies if it wanted to go up against the U.S., and that was its goal. It didn't want a U.S.-led free world. It wanted its version of the world imposed, but it recognized after the first Gulf War that it could not affect that on its own. So it created a regional alliance to kind of initially between Russia and China, and then they brought Iran into its nexus, and then some other countries, mostly in the Central Asian republics. But this is how you get, this cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China. It's formalized, and since the 2000s, they went from the Shanghai Five to the SCO, and they do multinational exercises, yearly. They do biannual security exercises. They do, working groups. This is a formal alliance, much like NATO. So it's kind of the bad guy NATO, if you want to think about it that way. But they've been operating for years in that. And what Sargis mentioned was that, a few years ago, around 2012, the Chinese foreign minister had literally put out, okay, well, this is your side of the world, this is our side of the world, and you stay out of our side, we'll stay out of your side, and then that's it. And the U.S., unfortunately, the U.S. administration at the time bought into that, and it at least in its pronouncements. So, like Sargis said, Susan Rice mirrored that new model of power relations, and we had our people mirroring a Chinese talking point, which was new model of power relations. And so, the idea being, if you just play nicely, that everything will be okay. And as we've seen from that time to now, that's not what happens. They only use that operational pause to advance their own agenda, to advance their own conquest, to advance their own stranglehold of free nations. And so that's important. And most people in the world, in fact, some very, very tuned in people, are still unaware of the SCO or the nexus between, for example, Iran and China. And it rarely gets reported. It rarely gets mentioned that a lot of the non-proliferation. So, like Sargis said, you can put up some sanctions on Iran, but who's Iran's ally? So, who is one of the major busters of those sanctions? Well, that would be their partner, China. And so, we have to understand that, sometimes these partner nations will advance each other's interest, much as we will, sometimes advance a NATO allied nation interest to be able to move forward. So, being aware of that SCO is important. So, when you hear Sargis say SCO, that's what he's talking about. And, good on him that he recognized it years ago and kind of, wrote about it, and you recognized it years ago. But many people have never even heard of the SCO and what they do, and then why it is a factor that every time you analyze something, you need to
Please
take
again
into
explain exactly what is SCO. This is vital for people, and most people don't seem to have any idea what it is.
Yep. So it's the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. So it is a military civil security information alliance, primarily between China, Russia, and Iran. But there's a lot of Central Asian. They wanted to create literally an axis between Central Asia and Iran, Russia, and China.
Basically,
and so
a NATO of bad guys.
Exactly. Yep. It's a new axis. So it's the evil NATO, so to speak. And so they have multinational multilateral exercises every year. They'll do security. They have military missions. Like if you think Cobra Gold, kind of level for what we do with Thailand and Southeast Asia. That type of multinational exercise, they'll affect that with their team. But it doesn't get reported. So I've been surprised how many people that I'll mention the SCO to, and they're supposed to be dialed in, and they've never heard of it. It's like talking in Europe and the relations between European nations and European armies and America and Britain without factoring in NATO. Is this within a NATO framework?
If I can also, Mike, I'm not sure. I think
this
we're breaking
is
up.
Sargis Sangari talking now. This is Sargis Sangari. Al Johnson was just speaking. This is Sargis. Go ahead, Sargis.
So look, here's the importance of SCO. SCO basically takes like-minded nations and have them work together. As an example, okay, I think there's one. Years ago, we used to always speak about America's interest in promoting liberal democracy, humanitarian values, and the items that were critical to us to be able to promote democracy across the globe or help democracies to expand across the globe. For whatever reason, our leadership in Washington gave into the dollars more than trying to promote those tank, structures within any country that we need to be able to have a relationship with like-minded people. So China, in this case, is a dictatorship. Iran is a dictatorship. China believes that it needs to expand its communist manifesto across the globe. Iran believes it needs to be able to expand its manifesto when it comes to Islam across the region and across the globe. So what happens is like China and Iran to work together. Why? Because they want to export their philosophies, their dictatorships. They have a certain way that they control their populace. So in this capacity, SEO is a reason why you can have countries like Russia, which is a communist country still that is under dictatorship of Putin. You have China under dictatorship of and you have Iran under the dictatorship. Now, where they start working together economic basis is where the SEO legitimizes across the globe. Because what it does is, in this case, China says, I need oil. It goes to Iran, says, give me oil. Iran says, I'm going to give you oil, but because you can't give me dollars, I need you to represent me on the international stage. So China says, okay. So China technically is getting oil for free from Iran, not paying $1 for it. Iran is in Syria, Iran's in Iraq, Iran's in Lebanon. So Iran is exporting its ideology at the same time because it's not tied to China and expanding China's footprint everywhere else. Last year, I wrote an article on backyard wars to kind of explain this to the common person in the Daily Herald, which is a Chicago newspaper, and expanded it to where for China, Iran is its backyard. And by being in Iran, and Lebanon is able to be in Syria, is able to be in the Gulf states, and it can buffer against U.S. policy. As America sits in Afghanistan, as we are still there, China is able to squeeze us, not just from the eastern side of Afghanistan, but also from the western side, because Iran is there. And once it invests money, in this case in Pakistan, as you and me both know, Mike, even years
Sargis, we lost you for about 8 seconds.
Yeah.
We lost you for about 8 seconds,
okay,
10 seconds. So re-say that, please.
Yeah. As you know, you and me, when we were looking at the Rohingya genocide and how China was trying to...
Right, the Rohingya genocide, that was somebody that you and I together went and met with some interesting people with in an undisclosed place.
Hear me?
Breaking up.
To the National Security Council. Yeah, it did lead to a white paper that I gave to the National Security Council when I came back, and it's also at the same time.
You mean subsequent our meetings with those people? You
correct.
Okay,
correct. And then I was able to also turn around and give a white paper to Australia as to what China is trying to do in Southeast Asia. So China, look, this is a type of a relationship that a lot of politicians don't see as to why. And China or Iran and Russia are able to operate together so easily. Now, I will tell you one thing, that they do take advantage of each other. In this case, China tries to ensure that Iran is under its fear by giving it all the junk that it has, but paying nothing else and giving it some influence on the global stage. And Iran, has to execute Middle East, which is the reason why Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the military side of the house is able to do operations in the Persian Gulf, to include where if you look over the skies of Syria at any given time, you got 5 different countries flying around, and a lot of them are flying off of even Chinese carriers. Getting the training and the operational experience that they need to be able to sustain themselves against this global war as China sees it against the United States.
Al?
Good stuff. Now, I want to kind of bring that back home. So, we recognize, that there is a global war, recognize that there's a lot of nexuses between, the Middle East and China. And then, in other areas that we won't even get into because there's so many. But one thing that I want to hit, and one of the reasons I think that Sargis is running for, correct me if I'm wrong here, the ninth congressional district in Illinois, or for the U.S. Congress, correct?
Yes, actually, I'm not a candidate. I'm actually the nominee from the Republican side, so I am definitely in the election all the way through 3 November. So 3 November, the members of the 9th congressional district can make a decision if I'm in Congress or not.
Okay, and then so part of it now, what made you want to run? Why did you you're looking at these 10,000 foot level issues, these 50,000 foot issues, and that sort of thing globally. What made you want to go to Chicago or back home and be able to run for Congress?
Because I realize that we're ceding territories to the Chinese, and especially for me being on the ground fighting in Iraq, Syria, I realize that we're literally ceding areas that are going to be against American interests. And for a guy who's down when your buddy's dying in a specific location, you remember it, and every time you drive past that location, you go back to that region, and you're like, that's where my friend died, but we have turned over all this blood and all this sacrifice, all this time to folks that have no interest in ensuring that American values are promoted, that American interests are taken care of. Then I said, if you're not at the table, you're not going to have a say. When I had briefed the National Security Council that asked somebody from the State Department, a deputy, to come and meet with me in Chicago, I'm not going to say his name, but he came down to meet, and there was a document that we had worked on for 6 years from the U.S. side. You had guys from state, from military working on it. I went down to Iraq within a weekend. We were able to finalize an agreement between the various different political parties and presented that. And they asked me, he said, why am I talking to you? I said, because did you read this document that we were able to finally get over a weekend that everybody had been working on for 6 years? He said, no. I said, it was opened by you in March, for God's sakes. And now we're looking at late, September, October, and you haven't even looked at it. At least make us pretend like you care. And it was just a waste of time. And I said, why am I doing this? I might as well go get in Congress and then start setting the stage right through legislation to ensure these individuals do not continuously keep on destroying our U.S. presence within the regions. Look, my grandmother, who was born in an Assyrian woman born in a village in northern Iran, named 3 of her sons: Coolidge, which was my dad's name, Wilson, and Harding. She named them after the 3 presidents of the United States. Here's a woman who northern Iran naming her kids after presidents of the United States. Why? Because after World War II, U.S. had some credibility. You go find somebody in the Middle East who's naming their kid Clinton, Bush, or Obama. Nobody, because we've lost a lot of credibility. And to me, I've been dedicated all these years to serving my nation here. I don't want to see my nation garner a black eye. The Syrian Christians in Iraq when under Bush we invaded Iraq. They're at 150,000 left. The root of Christianity is being wiped out. We had.
By the way, may I interrupt, Sargis?
Yeah.
When he says being wiped out, he's talking about Assyrian Christians, which many people are familiar with, and a lot of others may not. So, if you can explain, a lot of people are well aware of who you're talking about, but others, I think, have no idea. So, if you want to take a sidetrack on that, it can be beneficial, I believe.
Well, Assyrians were the first really empire to establish in the Middle East. They actually have had 2 climaxes where Rome only had one. They, or language, or written language, or music, or anything that civil society uses today came from them. The nation fell in 612 BC. However, it was the first nation to ever accept the Judeo-Christian ideology when Jonah went into Nineveh and so if it wasn't for the Assyrian
Nineveh is
Christian
northern
church,
Iraq. It's a province in northern Iraq, where Mosul is the capital. It borders Syria and it borders Turkey.
Correct. And if it wasn't for the Assyrian Christian church, you wouldn't have expanded Christianity throughout Asia, into Mongolia, into Japan, into Philippines, into Korea. Those churches initially that were established in Southeast Asia were all established based on the Syrian church. So years ago, when or 3 years ago, when I first brought it up with the National Security Council, I told them at a strategic point of view, I said, what are you going to do when China starts using the leverage of the 43 million Christians in China because they have a relationship church-wise with the Syrian Church of the East? Are you ever going to counter that? No answer. 2 years later, revisited, still no answer. Eventually, as we abandon these minority communities and allow them to get destroyed, under our watch, I hate to say it, guys, we had Navy SEALs on the ground, we had Navy task unit, we had CJ SOTF, we had all our capabilities.
Can you please
armor.
explain who CJ SOTF is? Sargis Sangari, please explain CJ SOTF. Most people might not be aware of that.
Yeah, maybe I'm getting into the weeds a little bit. But it's the Special Operation Command, basically.
Combined Joint Special Operations Force.
Combined Joint Special Operational Task Force is part of the Special Operation Command. And in this case, it was the Arabian Peninsula, CJ. We had folks on the ground, and we couldn't secure the minorities. They got absolutely destroyed and killed. And to me, if you have natural allies who are like-minded like us, we need to support them. What does China do? It finds natural allies who philosophically align with them, in this case, Iran and dictatorship, and support them. What we do with our natural allies that we find on the ground, we let them get absolutely butchered, or we tell them you have to go and serve under people who don't share the same mentality. In 2014, when initially the Assyrian army commander came to my house and said, look, we need help from the U.S. government under previous administration, I said, you're going to get zero support. He said, but the Syrian Christians are dying. We are, people of Judeo-Christian belief. I said, the U.S. government under the Department of State is going to give money to the Iranian-aligned Iraqi government, which we help establish an Islamic constitution for. So at the end of the day, under the Islamic constitution of Iraq, regardless of what law passed, if it doesn't meet the Islamic dictates or standard, it doesn't apply. So in this case, is a reason why, and even in Iraq today, a person who's a Christian, who is a woman who's married to a Muslim man, the sons would have to convert to Islam. They cannot even stay Christian. And, only the State Department for us would say, you as a Christian Assyrian, you share the same Judeo values as I do, but you need to go to serve under the Hashishabi, which in 2015, they were putting our boys and girls under the Iranian-aligned militias, or you got to go serve with the Sunni Muslim Kurds. As much as they're a little bit more liberal Muslims, we like to believe, but they're still Sunni Muslims, which is the reason why in 2014 in Erbil, Iraq, while the genocide of the Syrians taking place, the Kurdish youth are tearing down a Christmas tree because of a representative of the Christianity that they don't want to have part of their future state, which would become an Islamic state after it was established. So this is what we do. We don't go find like-minded people. We go and support others that are more like-minded to China than they are to us, or to Iran than they are to us. We create these indirectly these type of dictatorships that suppress the minorities and don't allow us to be able to have partners on the ground for our future and the future of our only ally in the region, which is the state of Israel currently. So, look, it's a little bit long-winded, but it gives you a little bit of an insight as to where we are with what is happening currently within the Middle East region.
Al Johnson.
Now in Congress, what would be some of your goals in there? I know you're focused very much on that, but what could you do from the 9th district to kind of work against those sorts of things against the United States? How do you affect that at your sitting at the desk in the 9th congressional district in Chicago?
So it's based back here. You want to defeat the SCO in China? It's very simple.
The Sargis, the SCO. You just throw that out there, but that's a big term. You might want to explain it one more time. That's basically the NATO of bad guys.
Yes, is the NATO of bad guys for the more common term, uh, um, and it was created to defeat the United States and NATO. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which the lead four are the Chinese, uh, uh, basically is job is to try to defeat NATO and the United States influence globally. And it does it through economics and it does it operationally if need be. How does it do economics? Well, just gave the example of how it works with Iran. It goes into Iran. It takes oil free from Iran, but in this case, defends Iran on the international stage, which means a lot of the dollars that the U.S. currently uses for China. So we build our plants with our money, some of it with our taxpayer money. China uses
Breaking up again, Sargis.
and an influence within the regions. So China uses those manufacturing bases that we built through our dollars, whether it be private business or a lot of it came out of our taxpayer money, and to defeat us globally for their own interests, so they could be.
We're having a challenging link with Sargis in Chicago.
Mike, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're having a challenging link with you. It kind of sometimes it's quite good, and other times it drifts in and out.
I wouldn't be surprised. We're probably getting a little bit.
Getting a little jamming there.
Getting a little bit of jamming, but it's okay. Look, base for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this juggernaut, this anti-NATO capability. The money that we spend on those manufacturing bases build China's ability to counter us. But we started this long time ago, even under Clinton, and I know Mike would probably know this. The Chinese couldn't even do airfield seizures, but because we loaded up a lot of our technologies and we send it to the Chinese, even going back to under Clinton time, they were able to conduct airfield seizures when I was in the service, when we got briefed about their operational capabilities. And we've grown this for them through our dollars, okay? Now, they use that manufacturing base to try to defeat us and to try to defeat our influence and try to go against our national security policies wherever it is on the globe, whether it be Southeast Asia or even to include in the Middle East. It's very simple. How do they do it? They take those manufacturing bases, as an example, we just found out a couple of days ago. They make a mask for 80 cents and they sell it back to us for $8. Or what they do, as soon as the Wuhan virus broke, they still, because they knew they were going to take a economic hit, they allowed a lot of individuals from China to travel to the rest of Europe and even to the United States because they wanted to even out the playing field on the economic hit. So what ends up happening? The U.S. is now on the lockdown. We're suffering economically because China's goal is to make sure that we're always dependent on them. How else does it defeat us? It's very simple. It sends people from China to our universities here. And we're not talking about American Chinese. We're talking about Chinese that are sent here, that are members of the Chinese Communist Party, getting educated in our universities to the best of their ability, using our taxpayer money for support and grants. And then they go back and create systems, whether it be military or economic, to defeat us. So we have to get to a point eventually, say, why are we doing this to ourselves? And the best way to do it is force all those manufacturing bases to understand that when you're dealing with China, you're traded to the United States. You're dealing with the enemies of the nation, and you're dealing against individuals and organizations that are dictatorships and care less about human rights, could care less about promoting democracy across the board. Bring those manufacturing bases back to the United States, or give them to the nations and areas that are like-minded like us. There's plenty of them out there. And then if you do that, now you're building your friends and capacity, and now you're fighting in the backyard of China. By supporting India, you're fighting in the backyard of China. By supporting Mongolia, you're fighting in the backyard of China. By supporting a better economic deals with Australia, you're forcing us rather than to allow Chinese companies to develop. Even today, or I should say a couple of days ago, it was where Secretary Pompeo himself basically stated that this whole the piece with the 5G is going to make us more dependent on China. And if we're more dependent on China, then China's main goal is to be able to force everybody to have to be a hostage to its wants and desires on the global scale. And how it does it do it? It uses our money to develop itself economically to feed us across the board.
Well, that's good stuff. Now, one of the things in responding, I know you and I had talked about it offline earlier, but when this, for example, the coronavirus, right, which China is using to advance, whether or not wherever it came from, but they're definitely taking advantage of the outbreak to their own political games. They've kind of weaponized, the response to it. But why, in your opinion? I know you told me this earlier, but if you could repeat it for the audience, in your opinion, what was the U.S. government's culpability in allowing that to happen? In other words, back in January, what was going on? When Mike was out there saying, "Hey, get masked up, get yourself ready for this thing," when everybody that was paying attention was saying, "Hey, get ready," what was the majority of the U.S. government doing at that moment?
Well, we were too busy to kill each other. Korea in December 7th.
Hey,
to
Sargis?
kind of look at the region
Sargis?
again, because I know, yeah.
Yeah, that first 10 seconds
Can you hear me?
was yeah, that first 10 seconds had a crossed wire or something. Could you go back over that first 10 seconds again and your intro to that again?
Yeah, we were too busy fighting ourselves internally. And I know you've asked me about Thailand before, but look, as early as December 7th, I went to Korea because we were looking at partnering with South Korea, to be able to help us in the region in Iraq and Syria. And that was something I came back and I briefed the State Department about our national allies. Look, I have a lot of Korean Americans in my district, and this was going to also help us across the board. To be able to support Korea to a point where Korea in the future, I was one of the first ones that said that whether we like it or not, North Korea, South Korea, it has to be early. Make just try to defeat China. You got to fight them in that backyard. As early as 2016, 2017, I mentioned it in our articles. But I was there doing a regional assessment. We knew this was going to happen. Look, U.S. government did take this seriously. If we hadn't taken it seriously, then we wouldn't. Why would I have evacuated over 1,000 of our State Department personnel from Mission China in late January? Okay, so we knew something about to happen. We had that inclination. But if you look at it, in December 16th, there was the first time that the patient was admitted to the Wuhan Central Hospital who had infections, and we realized through open source that both lungs were infected, and this person was resistant to any anti-flu drugs. 2 days later, what's happening in the United States on December 18th, the President Trump is being impeached by the House Democrats. And I can say that because no Republican voted for that impeachment. On December 27th, Wuhan health officials were told at that time that a new coronavirus is causing this illness. So they had identified it at least. And in the States, the entire legislative branch had adjourned for the winter break for us without taking even any action on the Senate trial that the president would have to go through. So you fast forward to January of this year. By January 2nd, we have information that the Chinese researchers have started mapping the new coronavirus, and they had a complete mapping of their genetic information. Of course, the information wasn't made public for us until January 9th, but our U.S. intel had a good idea as to what was happening. What was happening on January 9th, China stated that it had mapped that genome. And on the same day, on January 9th, in the States House, Speaker Pelosi, in this case, was stating that she would deliver the articles of impeachment to the Senate as soon as possible by It was by January 12th, there were 5 genomes of the SARS-CoV-2 had been isolated from Wuhan, and it was even reported, believe it or not, by the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Derek Wong of our CDC, and by other institutions. And right now we have documents that we have received that showed that the head of the Chinese National Health Commission at that time, Mr. Ma, had laid out an assessment as to what was going to happen with the situation in China going back to January 14, where at that time it was a confidential teleconference with the provincial health officials. They had talked about what President Xi, Prime Minister Li, Vice Premier Sun had recommended as to do across the board to be able to stop this virus. But a day later, when we're looking at the 15th January in the States, Speaker Pelosi is signing the article of impeachment and celebration and handing out pens to the House managers, where the lead of those 7 House managers is Adam Schiff, who's the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. So we're getting information, but the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence is standing there receiving a pen to continue of the president. As I told you, we had already started pulling out our folks from Mission China. By January 22nd, a group of Chinese that were working on the full virus for the genome, and even the groups in the United States were using reverse genetic methods that had independently, and at least from an experimental standpoint, demonstrated that what we were referred to as the ACE2s could act as the receptor for the SARS, or in this case, COVID-2 virus. All that is happening on the same date, the prosecution for President Trump's impeachment has begun, making their opening arguments between January 22nd and 24th, and then I think the defense picked it up on the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. So on January 21st, first case of COVID is being announced on the 26th, which
of January,
followed by
right.
We had 12, correct, of January. While in China on January 24th, China is extending their lockdown to cover approximately almost 37 million people, and has started to rapidly build a hospital in Wuhan. At least our satellites can pick that up. And the question asked is whether our intel, our congressional leaders knew what the hell was going on, but they were too busy playing around in a trial that was going to be in the Senate by February 5th. I think it was it was February 5th that the Senate acquitted the president. And on that day, what happens? Wisconsin, north of us in Illinois, confirmed this first case, and then this whole thing expands. So, look, somebody has to take at least a blame for what is happening. We cannot constantly keep on doing this at our intel level, where you go back to where on the Bush we're bombing trucks that we think are Scud missiles, but they're actually milk trucks, and then where we have Clinton taking shipload of equipment, passing it on to the Chinese. Nobody had a clue that China had already a 100-year plan for God's sake. We're well ahead of it to try to replace on the global stage. And then fast forward, Obama administration agrees with the Chinese, allows the Chinese to expand through the SCO, which China is right now sitting on the underbelly of NATO. After they started the pandemic, they charged us additional money to give them the supplies to secure us for that pandemic, and is now sitting in Italy saying that we're the ones providing the support. So make sure you help us on the Belt and Road Initiative. And then you fast forward to where we are today, and folks have gotten information about what is happening with COVID, and the State Department is evacuating their folks, but our Intel committee chairs sitting in Congress are trying to bash each other in the head. Today, we know that China is actively working through all its governmental apparatus to try to defeat the United States. And when we say all this governmental apparatus, we're talking about their military, their education, their news, their economic capabilities, whatever they can, which is the reason why they send their students here to get educated, to go back and build the needed equipment and infrastructure for them to defeat America on a global stage. They do the same thing. Even I gave a talk at the anti-money laundering conference in Washington last year, and I called it hyper Hawala. Hyper Hawala is what China uses to try to expand.
Can you explain what Hawala is? A lot of people have no idea what you're talking about. That's a very important issue on threat finance and tracking enemy money.
Yeah, so Hawala basically it's a means of moving money outside of the regular banking systems. As an example, I have a cousin that is in, let's say, in Iraq. I want to give him money. I give money to a family member of a person who knows my cousin. I give that money here in the United States. It doesn't move. His family member who has now money there gives it to my cousin. So there's no transaction showing that there's money being moved. Sometimes
it's done often with just text. It's just done. It's just basically an improvised Western Union, and there's gazillions of them out there.
Correct, and China uses them to their benefit. Where does it become a hyper Hawala? Sometimes they do it through their institutions here. There's churches that are here in the United States. We're not talking about churches that are tied to Taiwan. We're not talking about churches that are Chinese American churches here in the United States, by churches that have an actual relationship that were established through old relationship with the Chinese government. Okay, and these churches will move money on behalf of China through donations. Now, it's all legal if you look at it from how a 501c3 does it, but China influences that money movement to be able to get its folks where it wants to.
Okay, to be clear, this is important. This is important. Where are these churches located?
Majority of them are located on the west coast of our nation, where they can have a position of influence that can influence our overall politics. When we talk about Russia's influence or China's influence, China knows how our electoral colleges work. It understands that if it can penetrate certain states, it can possibly influence what our elections
Can you
like.
slow down, Sargis? It's difficult for some people to understand because there's garbled communications and you're talking a little too fast. Those things together are making it difficult. Al, we're losing Sargis.
Mikey.
All right, Sargis, yeah, go. Okay, we can hear you now. You got probably about 15 seconds of good comms.
Al, I think I've talked to you about it. If your communication is better, you want to kind of talk to Michael, see maybe your communication is better, so I'm not getting jammed constantly here.
Okay. Well, just to kind of dovetail on what Sargis said. So as far as the locations of the hyper Hawalas, what this mostly they're focused on the West Coast. So they're being able to camouflage and be facilitated in some degree, but mostly camouflaging behind traditional or long established communities. And so this provides them the cover and numbers that they need to operate. And they understand that, for example, California has a very higher electoral college. So if you can influence, one state, these pivot states, California, the same as any candidate uses for their election in a national election. They understand these key states. But the West Coast, specifically California, San Francisco area, they can operate out of those areas, and they do two things. Number one, it provides a very good cover and a very good density that they can operate. So they can send money, they can move people in and out, and then they can have these connections, using the cover of the school of fish, if you will, to do an old analogy. But the second thing it does is in moving that money and influencing, they're able to influence personnel in those areas. So you'll see it, and this, Mike, you've seen it in some editorials, you've seen it in some political statements from some politicians, you've seen it, with a lot of people. They influence the governments in these areas in order to affect their agenda. So everything from, as you pointed out, Michael, Leland Yee and his Global Alliance Group, up to, or excuse me, the Ignatius Ding and his Global Alliance Group, even up to, for example, Ignatius Ding, who was arrested by the FBI and is serving jail time now because of his connections to some nefarious groups and promoting, kind of a CCP agenda. So mostly his connections to groups. But if you look at a history of what he did, both in the San Francisco School Board and then later as a state senator in California, you can definitely see a clear pattern of at least his thoughts paralleled that of the CCP talking points. And we'll leave it at that. But amongst this noise, so to speak, you have a signal, and that signal is these hyper hawalas, which the Chicoms are operating much as if some of the Islamic groups and some of the other groups using this non-traditional, like you said, this improvised banking system that doesn't leave a clear fingerprint that you can follow and track and see when monies get moved from where to where. And so that does become a problem. It was a problem in tracking Islamic terrorist groups. And it's also becoming a problem, as Sargis mentioned during his ACAMS conference, in being able to track, how the Chinese or how the Chicoms are influencing American groups over here. So hopefully that explains it. Like I said, Sargis will do a much better job than I will on it, but he seems to be having some communication issues over there in Chicago.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Look. The comfort Roman issue that you have covered so much, exposed to how China tries to use. Where does it really get this?
I think we're having so many problems with Sargis. We'll need to redo this.
Hey, Mike, if you can you call him on Skype to Skype? See if that might work. Because I think maybe on his wireless is getting intercepted or getting crossed over with another frequency next door or something.
Technically we can, but I don't have a Skype programmed in, so that's a negative.
Okay.
Future, we could do this, Mike. If you can hear me, we could continue this discussion in the future. But this kind of highlights a lot of the issues that we have. And if you guys can hear me on the other end, the best way to defeat China is to absolutely gut its manufacturing base, gut it and put it other places. If not in the United States, other countries that are like-minded like us. And then this way, you'll definitely be able to collapse the Chinese Communist Party and the government internally and expose all their networks.
Sargis, let's do.
Mike, did you hear me?
Let's pick this up on another time, but we'll do it on a better. This is simply not working well. I think it's probably frustrating for people that when you're clear, you're quite clear. At other times, you're not. Al, can you take it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like I said, Sargis, can we have you back at another day, and we'll try to get a little better comms going to you.
Yes, I'd love to talk.
Al, let's go ahead and.
Okay, we'll contact you later, Sargis. But just real quick, what if people want more information about you? Where can they go on the internet?
For the Near East, they could go to the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement.com. For United Assyrian Appeal, which is a 501c3, they could go to UnitedAssyrianAppeal.org. And of course, for our campaign, for my campaign, they could go to both things.
Breaking up too much, Al. Let's take it. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sargis. If you can hear us, we do apologize. Thank you very much for your time. And like Mike said, he'll try to get you back here shortly.
Thanks for coming on, Sargis.
Okay, guys. God bless.
Bring you back on soon. All right, Al, take it.
Okay. So yeah, he covered some really good points there. And that's, I think probably, looking at the comments that are coming up here in the live chat, a lot of people have asked, a number of times about SEO. And that reflects, what I've seen. I haven't talked to a former MI5 guy that didn't know about the SEO, and he was recently out. So it was kind of,
okay.
It's interesting.
You might want to explain who MI5 is to a lot of people who have no idea.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay. So,
well, come on, man.
You're right.
It's true.
No,
who knows who? You just said that an MI5 guy didn't know who SEO is. So, there's
true.
A lot of people who don't know who MI5 is.
Point taken. You are very correct. So MI5 is the British, one arm of the British intelligence service. And so there's one arm that kind of, at least the way it's been explained to me, and somebody may have a legal definition that's better, but we'll just leave it as it's British intelligence. And so there are even people whose job it is to go out and to look at the threats that are out there, and they're unaware of the SEO. So like I said, my comparison would be as if somebody's talking about Europe and America and how they move in political military alliances without talking about NATO. So if somebody says, hey, there's NATO, and they don't know about NATO, or in World War II, a good analogy is, you're talking about Germany, but not talking about, the Axis or nations that are allied to it. And so we have to understand that, many nations and groups operate within their own interests, but on some occasions, you will have nations that will operate within their allies' interests. And without recognizing that China does have allies, and those allies are also our adversaries. So, for example, Iran. We have to look at when we see Iran do something, and some people scratch their heads and they don't understand exactly why they do it. Well, are they doing it for themselves, or knowing the structure of the SEO, are they doing it to advance, China's interest? Did China say, hey, let's do a deal here. You promote this, you move this forward, and then we're good. So you have to understand that there are certain nations within the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, that will operate within to further the organization's interests as well, as partner nations within that. And that's a key piece that, for whatever reason, has been neglected in the public discourse for, as far as I can remember, since the formation of the SEO, and even before that, the predecessor to the SEO, which is the Shanghai Five. So that's important, I think, for your readers to have. And now your readers are actually probably more educated than a lot of people that get paid to do this kind of thing. So you guys are a step ahead, so that's good.
Yeah, Al, you're way ahead of a lot of the people on this sort of thing. I mean, for instance, on the comfort women issue, you're the one that brought it to me. So you're the one that actually, a lot of people are saying that I discovered. I didn't. You brought it to me. And so, and you were way ahead of the ballpark on that one, which has been vital. That the comfort women issue is nothing more than an information operation, just like accusing the United States of introducing the virus. We didn't do it. It's very clear that we didn't do it. And I'm not saying that the comfort women issue was not a real issue at one point, but anyway, Al, you and I need to get on and talk about comfort women issue together on a completely separate podcast.
I think the information war is important, and I think it's sad that this didn't get out before. In other words, now Americans are kind of waking up to, this is how China, weaponizes everything, right? So they're very much into what we used to call asymmetric warfare, and information and how you shape narratives is a part of their warfare. And most Americans would either ignore it or say it doesn't exist, or it's not effective. But you see it is, and the patterns that you identified and the patterns that we looked at before with this information warfare, initially on history, right? So it became a history war. They wanted to shape how people saw themselves, how people saw their partner nations, and then how people saw China, and shaping that, what we used to call hearts and minds of the global citizenry, affected their agenda. And so, that was, when it's history, most people ignore it. But as of late, since January, you've seen China, weaponize recent history. I mean, the history is still being written, and they're out there trying to weaponize it. And so if you would recognize the patterns and know the playbook of the Chinese during this history war period, when they were taking issues and transforming it, either exaggerating it or making it up out of whole cloth, or focusing in on certain issues that did happen. But if they knew that playbook from China, they would be more prepared now to understand, and they would not be surprised by what China has done lately with this coronavirus history. In fact, I sent there's a link on your page you put up there, which is nice, about the video that the Chinese government is putting out in the Middle East in Arabic. And that is, it specifically talks about the U.S. military putting that out there. Now, if you watch U.S. news, you're going to hear maybe that the Chinese foreign minister made a statement on his Twitter, and then he retracted it, saying, well, that's my personal opinion. That's not the Chinese official state line. And then the matter's dropped and it goes away. It didn't. The Chinese are invested in these talking points in the Middle East. And so you'll see the video, it's on your webpage there, about there's a Chinese woman. She's speaking in very good Arabic, and it's translated in Arabic in the bottom. There's also some English subtitles. And she talks about that this virus came from the United States military, to Wuhan in October. They're still promoting the narrative. The Chinese state government is still promoting the narrative. And that brings up two questions: is One is, why is this not being talked about in the United States? In other words, that news story hasn't really received as much traction in the United States as it did. That the link on your website is actually from Indian News Network. It's the WION channel, which has surprisingly been more accurate and in depth than anything I've seen on the U.S. side. I'm almost stopped watching U.S. news because there's no
Well,
information.
is it
coming
really
out.
news? It's not news, Al. You and I both know that. That's why we have
Well,
to do it ourselves. If they were doing their jobs, we could do something else.
That's a T-shirt right there. If they were doing their jobs, we could do something else. That's actually very good. So that works. But again, it goes back to, like you said, a good podcast on, or a good vlog here on the information war and understanding China's playbook, because the pattern doesn't really change. The pattern, it maintains itself. And so if you know their playbook, you know their pattern. They've done it before. They're doing it now. They'll do it again. And the question is, is the U.S. and the free nations of the world simply going to cede, the intellectual, the emotional narrative to an adversarial power, or are they going to counter it? And if people remember back in World War II, a huge front for the United States was ideologically defining their adversaries, and then ideologically defining who we are. I mean, Frank Capra and all that. It was a massive undertaking to do that. Later on during the Cold War, that was revitalized a couple of times, where we had to define ourselves, and you had to take that hearts and minds. You had to make a case for what is our value, what are we, what is the history of this thing, the real history, and show people the truth. In that video that I made for your listeners, June Chang, who wrote Mao the Unknown Story, she came about, her realization, her epistemological moment came from being exposed to the truth. So the best weapon, in my opinion, that we have, and Sargis Sangari talked about the best weapon is bringing industry back over here. Deny, remove that. Basically our subsidization of the Chinese government through manufacturing and technological transfers and investment. Take that away from them. Stop subsidizing the nation that wants to defeat you. That's his method. My method, I would add to that and say it's almost equally important, is simply expose the lies of the Chinese Communist Party, expose the truth about what is going on. Why don't we do that is also important. When looking at, okay, with these corporate media folks, why aren't you talking about it? In other words, sometimes we'll go 70 years in the past and say, oh, this is a tragedy, this is horrible. Oh yeah, it was. But what about today? What are the violations that go on today? And that's important. So you're absolutely right going on about, I think it's a good thing to talk about the playbook that China has and that you exposed in the history wars, because that way people will understand and can recognize that pattern when it occurs now in the, the coronavirus, PR wars, so to speak.
Yeah. Jan Benning points out America sent tons of PPE in January to China, and then China threatened to cut off our pharmaceuticals. That's what you get. That's what you get for dealing with, it's the old scorpion and the frog, or whichever version of that story you want to hear. And that's what we're dealing with China. It's a criminal organization, the Chinese Communist Party. Al's been watching it for years, as have I and many others. Al?
Yep, very true. And again, if people looked at the pattern, they wouldn't be surprised. And I think it was, I'd have to. I think you're in communication with him. But Gordon Chang mentioned that China, way back in March of last year, declared a people's war against the United States. So I think it was in February of this year, they declared a people's war against, euphemistically, people's war against the coronavirus. And that made some news over here. But what didn't make a lot of news, but that Gordon Chang was good about bringing it to the fore, is that there was a people's war against, the United States. And, their people's war is just their government. So the government openly declared the U.S. an adversarial power in March of last year. So, I know there's some comments there about, well, we don't want to start anything. It's already started.
We're at war with China. It only takes one to tango. This nonsense that it takes two to tango is absolute nonsense. It only takes one. One decides to fight, and then there's going to be a fight, or you're going to lose, one or the other. It only takes one to tango, and China's been tangoing for years. They are absolutely at war with us. Remember, they declared a people's war against sparrows once. Remember how that played out. They're always declaring. Al can explain that if he likes, but it's a really. China is often doing these idiot. We give them credit for being these geniuses that can do this and that, In reality, they've created a polluted, you got to go to China to see it. For people who've been to China, you need a machete to cut through the pollution. It's so pathetic and thick. You can see it. Go to YouTube and look at the pollution rolling into Chinese cities like Beijing. You know, time-lapse photography. You can see thick air rolling in like a wave, like a tsunami of filth. It's unbelievable. When I'm there, it's unbelievable. You know, there's a reason why a lot of people wear masks over here, and it's not just for the virus. It's because of the PPE. Anyway, long story, but the bottom line is they're not geniuses. They're smart, but they are also just criminals. So they don't have rules that they play by. When you don't play by any rules whatsoever, your ability to, you know, break into people's cars every day, you know, well, as they've been doing for years, Al.
You're absolutely right. And then I'm going to do a quick segue here before I forget. Penny Sanford is asking what microphone I'm using today. And this is from Michael, demanded after the last 2 times I was on that I get a better microphone. So this is actually an Audio Technica. I think it's an AT2020 Plus. So Penny Sanford asked, and there's your answer for that one. So, but back to your question there was, you know, China, people don't understand the CCP in its DNA. You know, as we said, you know, organizational structure dictates outcome. It is structured so that it must have a domestic enemy. All right. And so initially that was, you know, a class warfare. So they created, you know, classes even in you know, peasant villages, much like the Russians created kulaks, the Chinese would create, you know, even an educated group, or, you know, there's the wealthier peasant. And they initially could maintain it, sustain it off a class warfare base. But then they couldn't maintain that anymore. So then you see they created other threats. So they created Falun Gong, for example. They made that up as a threat. So Falun Gong existed, but why did it become an internal state problem? Well, they need an internal enemy to be able to sustain its operation. Their apparatus must have a domestic enemy, because in its DNA, the CCP is founded on conflict and struggle and strife. And initially it's class-based, but what happens when your leadership becomes the ruling class, becomes wealthy in such ways that you can't hide it anymore, right? When Shanghai becomes, you know, the glittering neon bedecked city that it is and displaying wealth, how do you make class your issue? Well, you can't. So you have to go to other things. You go to different domestic enemies because you built up that apparatus. And people don't realize the internal state security in China. It is the ultimate definition of police state. When you go to the dictionary and you look up police state, it should literally say, see China. And that would be the perfect, you know, definition of an oppressive police state, where, you know, you're taking temperature of students to see if their emotional reactions to what the teacher is teaching about the party are good or bad, or positive or negative. This is something that, you know, Orwell couldn't have even dreamed of. He barely got close to what was the reality within China that we have facilitated. And this is the part that gets me, and I think would really make people upset if they knew the culpability that many people in the free world have had in facilitating, you know, the police state that is the oppressive police state that is China. And that is a problem, in that we will proclaim, you know, moral superiority, you know, for something that happened 70 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. We tilt at windmills, but we won't do anything today. In other words, we try to build up inaction for today by saying, well, in the past, this is what I would have supported. Well, that's great. What are you doing now? You know, I opposed slavery in the Civil War. That's fantastic. Do you oppose slavery right now in factories in China? And then you get silence. And in some cases, the very same people that will sit there and be the loudest about, oh, you know, this was a horrible historical act, are the very ones that are the most silent or the most collaborative on promoting that very same violation today.
Yeah, and we're also, this is a sticky point, Al. I mean, this is a vital point. It's incredible. I mean, you're right. So many people complain about, oh, I'm so against slavery, and then absolutely engaging in it. But look at what I have to deal with here. I use Apple products. They're made in China. How can I get these things? We're trying to get you to use the same software that I'm using so we can do podcast. And here's the nitty gritty right here. I use a software called Ecamm to make this happen. I'm on it right now. So you're looking through Ecamm, right? And Ecamm only works on Mac computers. Macs are made in China, right? Because our organizational structure has dictated the outcome, as Al would say. And now the organizational structure has, you know, the globalization has put much of our manufacturing over in China. So this computer that I'm on is made in China by the slave labor that I'm so against. But here's the situation we're in. If Al's going to use this eCam software and help with these podcasts and get on interesting people like Sargis, he's going to need to get an Apple computer, or we're going to have to make some other big workaround. This is the problem that we've gotten ourselves into, where we have to basically buy an AK-47 from the enemy to shoot him. You know what I mean? It's really it's a conundrum, actually, and there's no easy way out whatsoever.
No, and it falls into the, sadly, it falls into the maxim, that they would sell the rope to the capitalists to hang them on. And as you can see, that it didn't work real well with the Soviet Union, because we were paying attention to it. We had a clear line of this ideologically is different, and we had a what I call an effective Cold War at different times, and we paid attention to it. But what happened was we believed that, for example, I really believe that when the wall fell, we thought that's it. We did a victory dance. We spiked the football in the end zone, and we're like, all right, we're done. And
not
we didn't
me.
realize
Not me. In my
1999
book, Danger Close, I mentioned somewhere in there we're going to have to face communism again. I remember actually writing a lot about it, and then I took it out because it was a diversion. It was very clear that we're going to have to deal with communism again. I know, because I lived with communists a lot. They don't quit. It's a cult, and cults don't just wash out with the next wave. They come right back in on the next wave right after that.
And the cult analogy is good. I know you talked to me about it before, and I hadn't looked at it in that light, but after you told me,
it's not an analogy. It's not an analogy. Communism is a cult. It is a cult structure. It is absolutely a cult structure, 100%. I've studied cults quite a lot, and I've lived with communists. Trust me, it's a cult.
Well, you can identify him. You're definitely the cult meister there. That's for sure. So we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, and an interesting aspect of cults is often when you disprove them. Let's say the asteroids come in, we're going to go away with the asteroid, and the calculations say that it's going to come at 32 seconds, 32.7 seconds after midnight on some certain day when the stars are aligned in some weird way. And all the cult people are like, yeah, let's do that. And so they give up all their worldly goods. I'm not using that example of the one where the guys cut off their testicles. I'm just kind of roughly, pattern, if you know the one I'm talking about. But then the thing doesn't happen, right? The great pumpkin doesn't come, right? So often the cults don't even vanish. They redouble in their recruitment efforts, and the cult grows. So after the cult has been proven wrong, it grows. Every time, when communism is proven wrong, they retrench. And they retrench and they go, well, the reason it doesn't work is because the whole world's not communist. So we have to make the whole world communist. So this is a proselytizing cult. So it goes out there and says, and furthermore, if you don't want to be communist, we will shoot you. So, it's one of those sorts of cults. It's one of those join us or die sort of cults. That's communism. It's a straight up cult. I'm always concerned when I see Germans in basements, writing a new philosophy book. We never know what's going to come out of that basement next.
Good point. Hey, the couple of the questions here on the side, and I'm not following this right now. Do you know anything about it? There's like 5 or 6 of these questions about oil being traded at certain barrels.
They're giving it away, Al. They're going to start. It looks like they're already paying people. Now, I'm not an oil expert, although there are some serious oil experts on my Facebook. Maybe I'll have to invite one on. I'll tell you I'm just shooting from the dark here. They don't have enough storage, right? And so they need a place to store it. And so because we need to get an oil expert on here, so take what I'm going to say in the next couple sentences with a grain of salt. Some of the pumps, when you turn them off, they're either hard to turn back on or you can't turn them back on. So that might be part of this. I do not know. So we need to, I know there are wells like that. There are wells that once you've knocked it off, it's dead. So I don't know if I'm not an oil expert, so that's all I'm going to say with that. But what we can say is the oil producing major countries over there that are trying to get rid of this oil have a strategic problem, or they would not be paying people now over $1, I think, in the last few hours to take their oil. What are we going to do with it? I know Chinese have kept oil out on ships actually for years. A lot of people don't realize. I got that actually from an intelligence source. A lot of that, they keep, but that's not much oil. How much oil can you keep on a bunch of ships? Not really a lot when you really factor in how much they produce every day over there. So this is a serious problem. Not to mention our fracking industry at this point is dead. So that's a serious problem for Americans, for the U.S. economy, for American workers who work, and our energy security. Although energy security is not a problem as long as they're paying us to take their oil. What are we going to do with it? You're going to drive around and, burn up the oil? I mean, we really need to hear experts talk about this, Al.
True.
All right, Al, let's go ahead and call it a night. And I'm going to study. I may come on later. But right now, do you have anything else to say, Al? You've always got something interesting to say.
Well, right now I'm trying to study how to use this non-Apple product in order to affect a good telecommunication here. So I've got some studying to do once I hang up.
Okay. The question is, where are all the chips and all that stuff made in your non-Apple product? You know what I mean? This is the conundrum we've got in. We like, pharmaceuticals. Most of the pharmaceuticals in the United States are made in China, or the NPIs and non-pharmaceutical ingredients are made in China. So you might go, okay, I'm going to boycott China. I'm not going to use any Chinese products, and I'm dead because I need some sort of medicine that's, a life-sustaining medicine. This is the situation that our leaders who didn't store masks got us into. The leaders who lied to us. That I'm not representing Al when I say I'm representing Michael Yon. The leaders who told us not to wear masks, this is the sort of thing that we've elected over the years, administration after administration after administration, and greed of stockholders and Americans in general and others around the world, not just Americans, humans, has led us into, people can complain about slavery all they want, just like Al, but the fact is, people, CalPERS and other people have been, their entire retirement funds have been invested into China using slave labor to build rockets and nuclear weapons to defeat us. I mean, this is the situation that we've gotten ourselves into.
True. And I think first step is education. Be it awareness of the problem is the first step in solving the problem. That applies for most things. So I think that's important to do in this case. And I think this, unfortunately, the pandemic happened, but it allows people an opportunity to, peer behind the curtain and see how things actually operate. And maybe that will be a impetus for change. Let's hope so.
Al does have a Facebook. Al, can you post your Facebook, and then I'll click that comment so that it goes up on the top.
Okay. Let's see. I'm an old guy, so it'll take me about a minute here to post that, but I will post it here.
By the way, Al previously was an EOD officer who did a couple of tours in Iraq. And now he's moved on to, I don't know if bigger and better things, because it's hard to get bigger and better than EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, Elvis.
Well, we just drank a lot. So, but no, and the second was actually CENTCOM. So we had 21 nations that we kind of tried to run around to. So that's how we ended up in, Kyrgyzstan and, everywhere. But that was a CENTCOM mission was the second one. So that was, 21 nations. And that kind of, brought me into the Central Asian republics. And that was quite interesting to see how those former Soviet satellites or, puppet states, what they were doing now. And so it was quite interesting. So.
By the way, you'll see Al posting on my Facebook now. So sometimes you'll see posts up there that, all right.
Hey, are you still fasting? I didn't even ask.
Yeah, I'm fasting. This is day 12. Day 12 with zero food. And actually Soy, whom Al knows as well, told me yesterday she's going to go ahead and go for 21 days. So I said, I'll go with you. We'll go to 21. So this is day 12. So, and I feel great. I feel fantastic, actually.
Nice. Well, you had one of your fans ask about, did you, is it a bigger hat or did your face shrink? So it sounds like your face shrank.
My
So good
face
job.
is shrinking. The incredible shrinking face. All right. All right,
All right.
Al.
You have a good night.
Talk with you soon. Bye.
Bye.
And I'll go ahead and punch out as well here. And I may come on later. I want to study up on the virus a little more. There's so many interesting things going on with this. And I'm going to punch out for now. Thanks for coming on. Mike out.